The 1974 Memorial Cup final included future professional hockey luminaries such as Clark Gillies, Ed Staniowski, Dennis Sobchuk, Real Cloutier, Chouinard and Kerry Fraser. Fraser, who spent 30 seasons as a National Hockey League referee, was about to turn 22 when he wore the stripes for the Canadian Hockey League Championship game between the Regina Pats and Quebec Remparts. 44 years ago, I was 2 years older than the players, marvels Fraser, flashing back to his first of many plum assignments. Kerry Fraser is shown during a 2009 NHL preseason game. Bruce Bennett, Getty Images. At the time, Fraser, from Sarnia, ONT, was refereeing for the first year at any level. After joining the NHL Officials Association on September 1, 1973, he handled minor league and major junior games during the hectic season. The NHL was impressed to the point where he was sent to the Western Canada Hockey League, now the Western Hockey League, for the entire playoffs. He was subsequently chosen for the Memorial Cup, which was held May 5–12 at the Stampede Corral, where the Pats defeated the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League's Remparts 7–4 in the final. "I do remember Kerry doing the Memorial Cup game and thinking how young he looked," recalls Staniowski, the victorious goalie in the 1974 CHL final. Ed Staniowski was the victorious goaltender in the 1974 Memorial Cup final. Regina leader post files Fraser still looks young, actually, even though he turns 66 on May 30. He called his last game on April 11, 2010, concluding one of the finest officiating careers in the NHL's long and storied history. Beginning in 1980, Fraser refereed 1,904 regular season games and 261 playoff contests, and worked in 13 Stanley Cup finals. But the first time he saw a trophy hoisted, it was the Pats who were doing the rejoicing. At the time, Fraser almost seemed like a peer to members of the victorious team. Perhaps that was what made Kerry somewhat special to those of us that played in the '74 final game. Staniowski says, "He was of our age group and we identified with him. For those of us who went on to the NHL and watched him establish himself as the top official in the game, there was a connection. To me, Kerry was a true professional on and off the ice, always a gentleman and very, very personable." At 5'7" 1/2 and 140 pounds, Fraser initially focused on playing the game despite his diminutive stature. After graduating from the Junior A ranks as a member of the 1971-72 Sarnia Bees, he had scholarship offers to attend American universities. As luck would have it, future Detroit Red Wings head coach Ted Garvin, a native of Sarnia who was then coaching the International Hockey League's Fort Wayne Comets, passed along some friendly advice. He said, "Listen, you can play in the minor pro leagues, for sure, but you're not going to make it to the NHL. Why don't you get into officiating? We need officials in the game who have played to a good level and understand the players," Fraser says. Garvin then handed Fraser a brochure for a refereeing school in Haliburton, ONT. Kerry Fraser jokes with Montreal Canadiens legend Guy Lafleur, right, during an old-timers game in 2010. Dario Ayale, Montreal Gazette. At the 5-day camp, Fraser made such a positive impression that he was asked to officiate a men's intermediate game. Frank Udvari, then the NHL's assistant director of officiating, was in the crowd. Even after watching Fraser for only 10 minutes, Udvari liked Fraser enough to suggest that he attend the NHL officials training camp. Following the camp, Fraser turned pro. As a linesman, he spent the 1972-73 season working in the American Hockey League. Then came the 1973-74 campaign, which was eventful in so many respects. For starters, there was a trip to Flin Flon, Man, home of the WCHL's Bombers. Flin Flon was Fraser's first destination after the 1973 preseason. "I landed in Flin Flon and I thought I'd landed on the moon," he says, laughing. "When the little plane from Winnipeg landed in Flin Flon, I got off the plane, a small little propper, and a guy named Joe had a hat on and he was the baggage guy that took the baggage off the plane. He pulled the cart to where you could get your bag, inside the little Quonset hut that was a terminal, and then he put his baggage handler hat on a hook and took off a little green hat. He was also the limousine driver, so he drove those who needed a ride into town. The next thing I figured this guy would be doing was checking me into the hotel. Another adventure took place shortly after check-in. I'm sitting in the lobby of the Flin Flon Hotel, waiting for the linesman to come and pick me up and take me to the rink," Fraser continues. "It was like the Wild West. They had boarded sidewalks. I was looking for the hitching posts, but there weren't any. The hotel had one of those old switchboards where they plug the cable in. There was a little old lady sitting in front of the switchboard with the headset on. She's plugging these things in for the room calls. She says, 'Is there a guy named Kerry Fraser here?' I said, 'You mean Fraser?' She said, 'Yes, Fraser.' I said, 'That's me, ma'am.' She said, 'You got a call from New York?' She put the cable into one of the holes and the phone rang beside me. It was Frank Gudvari, who had seen something in me. He said, 'Hey, Kerry, I just wanted to wish you lots of luck in your first game with us. I know it probably seems like you're an awful long way from the NHL. There's steps you're going to take and you're going to do great. I'm fully behind you. I know you're going to have a great career, but first, Fraser had to get past the indoctrination in Flin Flon, where the Bombers were playing host to the Saskatoon Blades. I went into this building, where Bobby Clark and Reggie Leach had played," Fraser says. "It was a mining town and everybody went to the game on Friday night. It was wild. They used to joke that when the bus pulled into Manitoba, the visiting players would get the Flin Flon flu. It was tough. I ended up throwing the Flin Flon coach, Patty Ginnell, out of the game. I was calling penalties left and right. By the end of the third period, I was patrolling center ice. They had a wire screen with no glass and they were throwing things at me and spitting at me, complicating matters." Fraser had spent the intermissions in the officials' dressing room, which was also a sanctuary for the off-ice personnel. "All these guys smoked," Fraser says. "There was a cloud in the room. I heard one of the goal judges or a member of the off-ice crew say, 'Geez, we're down by 2, meaning Flin Flon was trailing. I looked at him and I said, 'We're down by 2? What are you talking about?' He said, 'The Bombers are down by 2. I said, 'Listen, you're supposed to be neutral. You're on the off-ice crew. You're the goal judge. If I have to answer a question, I expect an honest answer.' I said, 'Besides, guys, I'm allergic to smoke.' So, I threw them all out of the dressing room and said, 'You're going to have to find a new room to do your smoking. You're choking me, you're killing me, so I'm 2 years older than being eligible to play junior hockey. I'm baby-faced with blonde hair. I look like I'm 12 and I'm rocking the boat.' Not only did I throw the coach out of the game at some point, I threw all of the off-ice crew out of the dressing room where they used to go. Welcome to the WCHL, Kerry Fraser." The next day in the Saskatoon Star Phoenix, the reporter covering the team talked about in his entire article about this young referee, this NHL trainee, who was fearless and called the penalties and wasn't intimidated and threw Patty Ginnell out of the game. Fraser says. Ed Chouinard was the president of the Western Canada Hockey League when Kerry Fraser got his start in refereeing. Jerry Carman, Vancouver Province, then WCHL president Ed Chouinard told me later that he had called Frank Gudvari back after reading the game report. He said, "Frank, what did you send me?" Gudvari right away went on the defensive and he said, "Listen, Ed, I told you that you've got to be patient with this kid. green as grass. Ed said, "No, you sent me a superstar." The whole column in the paper today in Saskatoon is about this referee who wasn't intimidated, who took charge, who called the penalties the way they should have been, and protected the players. I often laughed with Ed after that. That was my first game. That's how I started. So I went through the league and I worked at gaining respect and credibility. It wasn't always easy, but Fraser was on the path to becoming a legendary official. I had a few defining moments, he says with a chuckle. I had a game where the Calgary Centennials were spanking the home team and the home crowd was getting frustrated. The fans were booing. Every time a goal was scored against them, a player would come over and mouth off at me. With my little man syndrome, I'd bang him, with a 10-minute misconduct toward the end of the game, with the home team losing big time. Another goal was scored and people booed and threw things on the ice. Another player came over and mouthed off, and I had them sitting 3 deep in the penalty box. While they're cleaning the debris off the ice, the captain very politely skated over to me and said, "Mr. Referee, my coach wants to know if he can get a penalty for thinking." I said, "Well, if he doesn't think out loud, he's probably going to be okay." He said, "In that case, he thinks you're a bleeping censored." Now, I started laughing. I looked over at the coach who was looking for a reaction, thinking that I was going to throw him out of the game. He took a lighter attitude. He smiled and then he laughed. It was really a valuable lesson for me in that moment. This is about 3 games into my illustrious career. I said to myself, "Kerry, don't take yourself so seriously. You love the game. You're in charge. You're in control. But you don't have to be an expletive all the time." I decided it was better to try and get players and coaches to play on my terms without being aggressive. There were times when I had to show teeth and I had to respond and not be intimidated, but there were other times when you could get more bees with honey, so that was kind. A defining moment for me, Fraser's playoff duty that season included a first-round game between the Pats and Blades in Saskatoon. It was the second period and I never wore a helmet, he says. I had just turned to skate up ice, and I had given some player from Regina a penalty. All of a sudden, as I turned to move up ice, I thought I had got shot in the back. I got hit with one of those great big cowbells. The freaking thing hit me in the shoulder blade and put a hole in my sweater. I thought my shoulder was broken. They stopped the game and took me into the referee's room, and I could hardly move my arm. If the cowbell had hit me in the head, I was dead. Chouinard came in and he said, "Geez, what do you want to do?" I said, "Let me get my shoulder moving a little bit and then bring the guy in the room who threw it. Lock the door, give me a couple of minutes, and then I'll go out and finish the game." So he laughed and said, "Well, the police have him and they're not going to do that," so they carted the guy away. Lo and behold, I find out that it's Pats forward, Clark Gillies' uncle who threw the cowbell. Big Jethro and I laughed about it years later that it was his uncle who nailed me with the cowbell. After disposing of Saskatoon, the Pats eliminated the Swift Current Broncos in a semi-final series that lasted 6 games. In the other semi-final, Calgary needed 5 games to bounce the New Westminster Bruins. Calgary and New Westminster were emptying the benches twice a game, Fraser says. It was wicked hockey. If you could survive that as a referee, especially a guy 21 years old, you could almost guarantee that you could work in any league. Regina and Calgary ended up meeting in the WCHL final, in which the Pats swept their way toward the Memorial Cup. The 1973-74 Regina Pats are Memorial Cup champions. Regina leader post files, "I was chosen out of the referees in the Western Canada League to represent them in the Memorial Cup, so I was the one guy," Fraser says. It was, for me, quite a plum in my first year of refereeing to be chosen to work in the Memorial Cup, but also to ultimately referee the final game, even though the West was in it and I represented the West. They had decided before the tournament that they would rate the referees, and whoever they rated the highest would work the Memorial Cup final, regardless of whether the league that he represented was playing. For me, it was quite a feather in my cap. It was a nationally televised game. I had never done one of those. I remember in that final, a defining moment was when Clark Gillies got in a fight with the tough guy for the Quebec Remparts, Richard Nantes. Big Clark did quite a number on him and the game turned at that point. That game, as a whole, was a turning point for Fraser. There was quite a celebration afterward for the officials and the off-ice crew. Fraser says, "It was our celebration to finish the season on a high note. It gave me a really good start. The next season, I came back for the playoffs, but I had done mostly American Hockey League and Central Pro, so I was on the move. I certainly owe my start, having been contracted to the NHL, to the WCHL. I never forgot Ed Chouinard. We became very good friends. And I never forgot the confidence that he and his league demonstrated in me as a green-as-grass referee. I had no experience and I was wet behind the ears. Had it not been for the opportunity that they gave me, I wouldn't have had the career that I did in the NHL." The triumphant Regina Pats are greeted at the airport after returning home following their 1974 Memorial Cup victory. Regina leader post files Arvanstone at postmedia.com, twitter.com/RobVanstone.